Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay. Kieran Downey. After I think the only way we can describe it is chaotic Monaco Grand Prix. That was pure and utter chaos. It was exhausting to watch, so I can only imagine how exhausted the drivers are. Now, whether or not you agree with the whole two-stop strategy experiment that was implemented for this race weekend, whether you agree with it or not, it certainly has given us a lot to talk about. Probably a lot more than what we would have had we not had this strategy. So at least it's given us that. It's given us a lot to talk about. Whether you agree with it or not, whether you liked it or not, we'll sort of talk about that later at the end of the episode. The two-stop strategy did give us a lot of on-track shenanigans, I would say. I think that's the best way to describe what was happening in Monaco today. Pure and utter shenanigans. I thought we were in for a chaotic race after watching the F2 feature race and the Porsche Super Cup. The F2 feature race had an 11-car pile-up on turn 1 after lights out. I think there was 7 cars had to retire. It was chaos, I mean, as F2 always is. The Porsche Super Cup, again, had a huge crash going up towards Massenet and ended up with a fuel leak, an oil leak all over the track. So I thought it was going to be a bit more chaotic in terms of like how slippery the track was, but they obviously did a very good job of getting it cleaned up in time before the Formula One cars took the track. Now, as I said, we've got a lot to talk about, so we're just going to dive right into things with Sauber and Gabriel Bortoleto, who qualified 16th, started 16th, finished 14th, and Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified 13th, started 13th, finished 16th. Now, Bortoleto and Hülkenberg probably started on the strategy that we don't actually know what any of the strategies were, to be honest, but they started on the mediums, which seemed to be the right tyre, we assumed. There was a few soft runners that I thought was a bit mental, but Bortoleto did have a bit of an accident with Kimi Antonelli and crashed going into Portier. Now, Bortoleto had overtaken Antonelli through the Fairmont hairpin, and coming down to Portier, Antonelli was like, actually, I want that position back. Antonelli was ahead at the corner. Bortoleto should have 100% just bailed out of it, but ended up crashing into the barriers. We got a VSC very early on. He should have just backed out of the corner. It being Antonelli's corner, it being Portier, how tight it is. We have seen these kind of moves pulled before. They never really work out. He should have backed out the corner. His race would have been a bit different, you know, if he didn't have to pit on that lap to get a new front wing changed and then be stuck in the VSC traffic. Like, coulda, woulda, shoulda, but definitely of the opinion that he should have just backed out of that move. He had no right trying to maintain that position. Now, obviously, it was a mandatory two-stop, and around lap 28, Bortoleto pitted for his second stop and went on to the softs, which I don't know the reasoning why. I don't know whether they were being very ambitious as a team, thinking that he could maybe make it to the end, whether they thought stick him on softs, there might be another safety car or VSC or something that we can then pit him again and him not lose so many positions. Maybe it was the only tyres he had left when he did pit. That, I think, is less likely the case because he did end up having to pit again. The softs just clearly weren't the correct tyre to be on. So actually, instead of the 2 mandatory pit stops, Bortoleto ended up taking another one. And that third stop, that extra stop, really just hampered his running and punted him down the back end of the pack. In terms of Hülkenberg, barely seen him on the broadcast. As I said, a lot of the drivers were sort of hampered in their running by getting held up so massively by a couple of the teams that were basically playing a bit of a team game, and it really just hampered quite a bit of running. So in a track that it is difficult to overtake on, there is a bit of an unknown with what strategy do you go with, and where there's so much chaos going on around the track, I can see why Hülkenberg didn't really have a chance in hell. Also, because some of the drivers were holding up such big groups of the other drivers, it did mean that the front runners ended up lapping the back markers pretty quickly, and once that happens, it's very difficult to unlap yourself in Monaco, so there was just no chance in hell that was happening. Now, speaking of teams that were having a little bit of on-track shenanigans and using their drivers strategically to hold up other drivers. We've actually got the two teams back-to-back here to discuss. We'll kick things off with Williams and Alex Albon, who qualified 10th, started 10th, finished 9th. Carlos Sainz, who qualified 11th, started 11th, finished 10th. Whatever your feelings on this strategy was by Williams and by Racing Bulls, because they did the exact same thing, I think that you have to appreciate the genius of both of those two teams, because they took the new regulations and they addressed that track probably in the best possible way. I think both of those teams played an absolute blinder. However, I do think Albon maybe took things a little bit too extreme. Now, I had actually thought that Williams was sacrificing Carlos Sainz for the benefit of Alex Albon in my sort of original thoughts on it. Albon had qualified ahead of Carlos. It seemed that Williams were so set on getting one of the drivers' points that they would sacrifice another driver's race. Carlos, in that sort of opening stint, was really backing off of Albon and he was creating a bit of a gap. And I realised that they were doing exactly what Racing Bulls were doing, where they were using one driver to back up the pack so that their other driver could get a pit stop in and not lose any positions. Now, they actually went and did that. So now Carlos actually backed the pack up so much that Albon could get both of his pit stops done. They then swapped the cars, and Albon then started repaying the favour by holding up the pack so that Carlos could get his 2 pit stops in. I do think it was a genius move by Williams because it meant that both of their drivers scored points. Where I think Albon maybe took things a little bit too far, the drivers directly behind Albon were the 2 Mercedes drivers, and I do think there will have been a little bit of frustration from George Russell because the Mercedes strategy just... In fact, I actually don't think they had a strategy this weekend. I think maybe the strategist stayed at home. So I do think there might have been a little bit of frustration from George Russell at how things were going, but he knew that he was being held up. He was coming over the radio saying that Albon was driving incredibly dangerous, and coming into the Nouvelle chicane was nearly on top of the outside barrier, cut the chicane and just went. Now, we'll talk about that incident a little bit more when we come and talk to George Russell, but Alex was then holding up Kimi Antonelli, and Antonelli actually had to do the exact same thing because Albon was just coasting into the corner and Antonelli had to sort of take a bit of evasive action to avoid crashing into the back of Albon. Because Antonelli cut the chicane, he did actually get past Albon. He gave the position back, very nearly conceded the position to Tsunoda. It was a bit close, but... And listen, this is nothing new to Monaco or to Formula One in general. We've seen teams utilise one driver to hold up the pack so the other driver can get a free pit stop in. We've seen this time and time before. It was only last year that we were watching Kevin Magnussen hold up the pack so that Hülkenberg could go and score points. My issue is not with that because I do think that Williams and Racing Bulls were incredibly smart in taking the new strategy, taking the ambiguity in it, utilising it to the best of their ability to get both of their drivers points. What my problem with it is that Albon was maybe taking things a bit too far and was actually driving dangerously, was braking so heavy going into corners that it was actually running a risk that he was going to cause a collision with other drivers, was slamming on the brakes and then coasting into corners that other drivers were having to take evasive manoeuvres. So I do think that it was brilliant, but I do think Albon took it too far. It was amazing to see that little bit of teamwork, and as I said, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. What was a bit frustrating, the other bit I found a little bit frustrating was because so many of the drivers were getting grouped up behind that one driver, it meant that the front runners were approaching the back markers pretty quickly and then had to sort of fight their way through traffic. It just created a bit of a mess and a bit of a chaos out on track that, you know, the blue flags were showing, the drivers couldn't really get through the back markers and they were having to get through such a tightly bunched that it just really slowed things down a little bit. And also, maybe it wouldn't have been as frustrating if we were at a different track, but because we were at Monaco, where do you get past? Where does a back marker pull over to let someone through, to let one of the front runners through? Where do the front runners get past without either them having to go off the racing line and pick up a load of marbles on their tyres, or vice versa, and then having, a lap, 2 laps to try and clean your tyres off. But because these back markers are being held up so much, they're having to get out the way constantly because the front runners keep coming through. I think it was an incredibly ballsy and quite bold strategy that obviously paid dividends, but it's not without its low points and its frustrations, because I found myself getting frustrated at how it was sort of playing out with, your drivers getting free pit stops. The side effects of that I found to be incredibly frustrating. But as I said, Williams playing an absolute blinder. They ended up swapping the drivers back around lap 66, I think it was. The call had come through for them to swap the drivers. It did seem that it was going to be very difficult because Russell showed no signs of taking a pit stop, but he did end up pitting because rather pit and finish outside the points and get disqualified. So it did mean that they could swap the cars. Both drivers scored points. Happy days for Williams. The other team that played the same kind of strategy, obviously, was VCarb, with Liam Lawson, who qualified 9th, started 9th, finished 8th, and Isaac Hadjar, who qualified 6th, started 5th, and finished 6th. Just quickly, Hadjar did move up a starting position due to Lewis Hamilton's penalty. Again, incredible teamwork happening from the VCarb drivers. They were using Liam Lawson to back up the pack to allow Isaac Hadjar to almost get a free pit stop in. Lawson was lapping about 2.3 seconds slower and created such a gap that Hadjar pitted and came back out PA. After his first pit stop, Hadjar had a very short second stint, pitted again and went on to hard tyres, and basically then just ran to the end of the race. So a very smart strategy there from VCarb to use Lawson to hold up the pack, get Hadjar pitted, get him on a very short stint, get him pitted again and put him on a hards so that he can run to the end of the race, because we know a hard tyre can and will run to the end of that race, and it will do a pretty big stint. Now, as brilliant as the VCarb strategy was for them, it was frustrating probably for the Williams drivers and for the Mercedes drivers, which was probably why Mercedes didn't pit at all really until the closing laps of the race. Because Lawson was holding up the team so much in that opening stint, if either the Mercedes drivers or either of the Williams drivers had pitted, it would have put them back into traffic behind Yuki Tsunoda, who was sitting around P15, 16 at the time. So they couldn't pit either of their drivers without running the risk of, in fact, not even running the risk, without directly putting them into a thick of traffic with no clear signs of being able to move through the pack. What then brought Liam Lawson into the fold was Williams then decided to play the game that VCarb were playing, and by them holding up the pack so much, it meant that Lawson could get some pit stops done, and it meant that he wasn't going to drop crazy positions either. So in turn, Williams then adopting a strategy that when VCarb were doing it probably really irked them and annoyed them and frustrated them. By them adopting that strategy kind of helped benefit VCarb, because it meant that Liam Lawson could stay within the points as well without having to lose any real time through having to try and fight through a pack where you can't actually fight through a pack at all. So yeah, an absolutely incredible strategy from both VCarb and Williams. I think they played absolute blinders. It was incredible to see this coming from VCarb, because usually the drivers are running so good on the road, then VCarb pull an absolute left field on the strategy and it punts them back down the far end of the grid. So it was amazing to see the team not actually hamper the drivers with the strategy. I mean, between lap 30 and 40 of the race, both VCarb drivers had done their 2 stops. So that's 4 stops out of the way for them. They're both on a tyre that they can run to the end of the race on. It was a gamble and it paid off massively. And with this, I believe Hadjar's best finish so far this year. It's Liam Lawson's best finish this year. He's got points, which is, thank God, finally. Hadjar is now 10th in the standings. It was a very, very solid weekend for VCarb, and I'm absolutely here for it. Moving on to Haas, and we have Esteban Ocon, who qualified 8th, started 8th, finished 7th, and Oliver Bearman, who qualified 17th, started 20th, finished 12th. Now, Bearman obviously started 20th because he had a 10-place grid penalty to serve for a red flag infringement. He overtook Carlos Sainz under red flag conditions. He just didn't slow down. I kind of thought that we would maybe see a sort of unsafe release penalty or a team penalty. They let Behrman out of the garages to make his way to the starting grid with a cooling fan still in the side pod. And one of the mechanics had to actually enter the fast lane of the pits to go and retrieve it out the side pod. So I did kind of think there would maybe be a penalty or something coming for that. I haven't seen anything, so I don't know if anything's come out. I haven't got the notification of the document, but very weird one from Haas there. Behrman was on the mediums and he made an early pit stop, and at one point was actually the fastest car on track, and it just showed how much everyone else was really looking after their tyres, because Behrman was just in clean air and could just absolutely send it to get up to the back of the pack. But he was actually lapping 4.3 seconds faster than Lando Norris. So you can tell that there was just some element of trying to manage your tyres. I have to say, I think Oliver Behrman's race was quite scrappy, to be honest with you. He looked quite messy out on track. Yeah, it was just a bit of a messy race from Behrman. And I know he is a rookie and he'll sort of, as the years go on, he'll tidy it up and stuff. But yeah, I wasn't that impressed by watching Behrman out on track this time round. Now, obviously, the stewards have investigated the unsafe release and Oliver Behrman has escaped scot-free, but the team, Haas, have been fined €5,000 for an unsafe release. Ocon, barely seen him throughout the whole broadcast. He kind of was benefiting from V-Carb and Williams playing that game of holding everyone else up, because it kind of just allowed him to run slightly. He was never really grouped up behind anyone, and it just allowed him to sort of maintain his position within the points. And I have to say, I think it was a solid... Is it really a solid? I mean, it's good points for him, to be honest with you. But yeah, I have absolutely nothing to say for Esteban Ocon. Like, I think it's great he's managed to score some points, but he was just barely shown on the broadcast. And to be fair, it's quite nice not to have much to say about Ocon, because usually when there's chaotic races, he's front and centre, but actually kind of kept himself to himself this time. So, nice wee solid haul of points. Well done, Ocon. Next up, we've got Alpine, and Pierre Gasly, who qualified 18th, started 17th, did not finish. And Franco Colapinto, who qualified 20th, started 18th, finished 13th. Again, both of these drivers benefiting from penalties awarded to Oliver Behrman and Lance Stroll, sort of bumping them up the grid a little bit. Feel bad for Pierre Gasly. Obviously DNF'd. He was coming out of the tunnel towards the Nouvelle Chicane and had a bit of a lock-up and went straight into the back of Yuki Tsunoda, broke his front left suspension. Now, when I was watching it, I was a bit confused as to why he didn't just pull over the car, why he continued to go back to the pits with the front left suspension broken, the front wing broken, he was leaving debris all over the track, and I thought there's a exit road right there, you could have just pulled over into that. What I didn't realise was that he'd actually lost his brakes because of it, so when he got back to the pits, he couldn't actually stop the car himself. Somebody else had to stop the car. So I can see now why he didn't pull over where he did, and I wonder if that is why the stewards are investigating the collision with Tsunoda and not him driving back to the pit lane in an unsafe condition, which would be classed as dangerous driving. He's been summoned to the stewards about 45 minutes ago. We're just awaiting the decision document from them. I imagine it'll come within the next 20 minutes. But yeah, an unfortunate end to Pierre Gasly's race. I was a little bit annoyed at him not just pulling over the car, because I thought we were going to get another interruption to the race, which was the last thing I really wanted, but I actually understand why, and all we got was double waved yellows so that they could just retrieve the debris from Pierre Gasly's car off the track. Colapinto, another driver who basically just wasn't shown on the broadcast. I think he was obviously a bit unfortunate to be caught up in all of the shenanigans on track with getting held up and everything like that. I don't think he really stood a chance of scoring points anyway, and it's just a bit unfortunate for him. He's obviously managed to make some positions up through Bortoleto having to pit 3 times instead of 2, through Antonelli not pitting up until the final moments of the race. So not really anything to write home about from Franco Colapinto. Moving on to the Aston Martin team, and Lance Stroll, who qualified 19th, started 19th, finished 15th. And Fernando Alonso qualified 7th, started 6th, did not finish. Now, Stroll did qualify 19th, did get a 1-place grid drop and then another 3-place grid drop, but still started 19th. The way they serve penalties is they almost look at it if on the grid, if we had 30 positions, Behrman's 10th place penalty would have put him behind Stroll anyway when Stroll served his penalties. So when they do that, they basically see which car will be in front, and that's the way they position them on track. So yes, technically Stroll has served his penalty, but he starts in the same position. Lance Stroll's another driver I don't really have much to say on, to be honest with you. He kind of flew under the radar the entire race. His teammate, not so lucky. Another race, another weekend with 0 points for Alonso. He generally actually might be the most unlucky driver in Formula One. He started on the hards, was really just not having a great time out there. He was getting held up quite a bit by the likes of Liam Lawson to help benefit Isaac Hadjar. It was getting on his nerves. It was frustrating him. He got overcut by Lewis Hamilton. It just really wasn't going his way. And then he retired. He pulled over the car at Rascasse. There was smoke coming out of the engine, clearly a PU issue. So just let down by his car. That means it's another week in our predictions that Alonso will score points, because he can't go the full season without scoring points. Can he? I hope not. Next up is Mercedes, and boy do we have a lot to talk about with these guys. So George Russell, who qualified 14th, started 14th, finished 11th, and Kimi Antonelli, who qualified 15th, started 15th, finished 18th. For Mercedes, I'm really confused by their entire Sunday, to be honest with you. It's almost as if the strategists just weren't there. Because, one, I don't understand why they put both drivers on the same strategy. In a race where there is a huge unknown in terms of the strategy and the mandatory two-stop, and I mean, even Pirelli didn't even know what the teams were going to do. They had no clue. When there is such an unknown, why put both your drivers on the exact same strategy is beyond me. I don't know why they decided to put all their eggs in one basket, why they didn't split their chances 50-50 and put Russell on one strategy, put Antonelli on another, and then perhaps one of them might work out. But they just backed themselves into such a corner because they put both drivers on the same strategy. They also got held up by two teams. First time by Liam Lawson, who was creating gaps for Isaac Hadjar. Then Williams did the same thing, created such a gap that Alex Albon could get his 2 pit stops in. Then Rolls reversed it, Uno reversed it, and did the exact same things to get Carlos Sainz's pit stops in. But out with that, Mercedes just did nothing the entire race. They did nothing. There was no bold move. There was no riskiness in it. Why they didn't just take a gamble is beyond me. Like, better to have taken a gamble and not finish in the points, because at least you can say you tried, than do nothing and then still finish outside the points. And I don't know whether they were waiting for late safety cars or something like that. It's the only thing I can think of that they chose to do what they did. And it obviously just didn't pay off for them. You then have Kimi Antonelli, who's ran, 66 laps on his hard tyres, having to take 2 pit stops, and it's absolutely slingshotted him to the back of the grid, and he's finished dead last. You've then got George Russell getting so frustrated at the whole thing that's going on. You can tell he's getting absolutely nowhere. Mercedes were just doing absolutely nothing. He wasn't in a chance to go and score some points because his strategy was null and void. In fact, actually, there just wasn't a strategy. He's been held up by 2 different teams. He's got Alex Albon in front driving a little bit dangerously. He's cut the corner and then been given a drive-through penalty, which I have to say, it is his own fault. He cut the chicane, obviously, to try and avoid Alex Albon's slightly dangerous driving. He was told by the team to give the position back, and his response was, no, he's driving dangerously. I'm not giving this position back. I'll take the penalty. And the stewards don't like when drivers do that. They don't like drivers saying, fuck this, I've had enough. I'm just going to cut a chicane or cut a corner, gain a position, and you know what, I'll just take the penalty. I think he maybe thought that he was going to get a little less of a severe penalty. I think he was maybe expecting a wee 5-second, 10-seconder. But no, the stewards, who obviously don't like drivers pulling those kind of moves, gave him a drive-through penalty, which is essentially a 20-second. So whatever hopes George Russell had of scoring points or whatever just went clean out the window. I'm amazed that he still managed to finish P11. I'm so surprised that Mercedes, who have been running very well since the beginning of the year, have had some phenomenal finishes, how they just let the whole thing fall apart like that. I don't expect Mercedes to be not even that bad, but just to be not clueless, but just like nowhere with their strategy. Just to not, as I said, it almost feels like the strategists just didn't come to the race this weekend. Like they just stayed at home. They'd all been given a holiday because I don't know what the strategy was. And I genuinely, it feels like they just didn't have one. Whatever it was that they were doing, it did not pay off. And the fact that they just did nothing meant that Russell finished 2 laps down. Granted, he's not the only one, but Antonelli finished 3 laps down. They just accepted being stuck and just accepted doing nothing. And that's not the Mercedes that I know. So I'm very surprised that I'm just very surprised by Mercedes Sunday, to be honest with you. And I think you can see by Russell's actions just how frustrated he was by Mercedes just, it's almost like they didn't care. I mean, I know they will have cared, but I'm actually quite surprised. I'm quite shocked at Mercedes. But yeah, I think George thought that because Albon was driving a little bit erratically, because we all knew what was happening, that maybe the stewards would have been a little bit more lenient on him. But unfortunately, because he was so bold and open just to say, no, I've had enough, I'll take the penalty, I don't care anymore. Yeah, the stewards don't like that. They don't like that. And I think had he maybe been a little bit more apologetic and not as brash in his response, and I think maybe the punishment might have been slightly different, but just to be so bold in I'm not giving this position back, I'll take the penalty, the stewards will put a bit of a hefty fine on you for that. And to be fair, it's well within the stewards' rights. I mean, each of the infringements will have a sort of level of severity. You know, cutting a chicane and gaining a position isn't going to give you a drive-through penalty. You're probably getting a 10-second, I would say. But because of his response to it, they gave him 20. And I think, yeah, quite right. Because a drive-through penalty is about 20 seconds. So fair enough. So yeah, not a great race for Mercedes. In fact, not a great weekend, to be honest. Pretty much a disaster all around. No points, a crash in qualifying for Kimi Antonelli, George not being able to take part in Q2 because of a power unit issue, the most bizarre lack of strategy, a drive-through penalty for Russell, and Antonelli finishing dead last 3 laps behind. Alright, next up, Red Bull and Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified 12th, started 12th, finished 17th, and Max Verstappen, who qualified 5th, started 4th, finished 4th. I'm surprised Yuki actually managed to continue with the race. I was surprised that after the collision with Gasly, I thought he would be out, but he managed to finish the race. I think what hurt him was a really early pit stop, put him into the traffic, and he could just never really get a move done and just couldn't really recover because he was always going to be stuck in traffic, and he never really had the gap to be able to pit and, you know, come out in clean air. He was always just going to be stuck in traffic, and then by the time we got to lap 70, he was still to pit. I think Red Bull pitted him too early and then left him to go long in the hopes that we were maybe going to get a safety car or a VSC or even a red flag so that they could maybe get a cheap pit stop in. But unfortunately, that never materialised. And in the closing stages of the race, he had to take a pit stop, pitted, and then it put him second to last. And he had to take the pit stop, by the way. These are mandatory pit stops, and if a driver doesn't take their pit stop without there being some kind of reason for that, like if the pit lane gets closed or something along those lines, if there is no mitigating circumstances and a driver doesn't pit, they will automatically be disqualified. If it's a mandatory pit stop, they will be disqualified. So he had to pit. I think Max Verstappen ran a pretty decent race, and he was never really going to be in with a chance of getting the win, I don't think. He did try a bit of a move on Piastri when we had the double yellows after Gasly had his incident and had crawled back to the pits. Coming out of the Nouvelle chicane towards the back, there was double waved yellows, and by the time you got to the back, the green flag was showing. Verstappen tried to move. Verstappen was over the radio saying Piastri was driving slow, dangerous driving, because it was normal racing conditions at that point. Piastri was over the radio saying Verstappen was trying to overtake under double waved yellows, which is against regulations. Nothing really came of it. That is what it is. And what I will say is thank God for Max Verstappen, because the front four, Verstappen, Piastri, Norris, Leclerc, they were pretty much processional for the whole way, out with a wee sort of change through the pit stops. And their race really came down to the pit stop strategy. And thank God for Max Verstappen, who in the closing stages of the race was leading and really just decided to back Lando Norris up towards Charles Leclerc in hopes that maybe something would happen there. I mean, Verstappen still had to pit. There was enough of a gap that when Verstappen pitted, he would come out fourth, no issues. But I don't know what his reasoning for it was, but it did really provide a little bit of entertainment in the closing stages of the race because he'd backed up Norris to Leclerc. Leclerc then really hustled his car to try and get some moves done, but unfortunately, there just wasn't the opportunity. You know, he would build up for the whole lap, he would really build up to get right behind Norris, and then as soon as we got round that final corner, Norris would just bolt and Leclerc couldn't really get up to him. But the reason we got quite an exciting end to the race where there was a little bit of a tension of, is this going to happen, is because Max Verstappen decided to try and bunch them all up to create a little bit of fun. I don't know why he did it, because I don't know whether he was hoping maybe for a bit of a falter for Lando Norris. You know, Lando is the closest competitor to him in the Drivers' Championship, so I don't know whether he thought perhaps Leclerc might be able to get a jump on Lando, whether Lando might have some issues and, you know, Leclerc will get past him and Lando won't be able to gain as many points on Verstappen. I think that's probably what it is, but it's unfortunate for Verstappen. You know, he finished where he qualified. I think he would have been quite happy to get a podium out of anything today, but it just wasn't on the cards. But yeah, he kept that race alive. Speaking of Leclerc, we have Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 4th, started 7th, finished 5th, and Charles Leclerc, who qualified 2nd, started 2nd, finished 2nd. Lewis Hamilton obviously got a 3-place grid drop for impeding Max Verstappen during the qualifying session, and kind of just ran his own little race, to be honest with you. He managed to get a beautiful overcut done on Isaac Hadjar and Fernando Alonso, which was obviously a great benefit to him. Monaco is a circuit where the overcut is way more powerful than the undercut. Usually it's the other way around. But yeah, Hamilton just really was in his own race for most of it, to be honest with you. He never really had the threat, apart from in the opening stages, from Alonso or Hadjar, where he kind of was just playing things a bit cool. He was then told to, you know, put a bit of pace into it to create yourself a bit of a gap here. He'd managed to sort of get a bit of a gap to the cars in front that he could put a bit more effort into it, open up the gap on the other side, and then get himself a nice little a nice cheeky pit stop done. And he did do that, and he managed to get the overcut done, as I said. And then after that was really just running by himself. He was about a second behind all of the cars in front. They were just absolutely up the road. All the shenanigans were happening behind him, with Alonso retiring and the V-Carbs holding everyone else up to get them pitted and everything, that he just kind of ran by himself for the most of it. But not the worst result for Hamilton. Could have been a lot worse. Charles Leclerc, who I think did a brilliant job, who I think, it being Monaco, did lose the race win yesterday in the qualifying session. I think he did run a brilliant race. I think he's unfortunate that he's missed out on the win at home. I am devastated for him. I think on the flip side though, if you had told me coming into this weekend that Charles Leclerc would get P2, I'd have laughed in your face. I'd have laughed in your face because I think you were pulling my leg. But I would also 100% have taken a P2 any day of the week. With Ferrari's recent performance, a P2 is as good as a win in my eyes. But seeing how the opening sessions went, where he was fastest in every practice session, that he was going to do in quali what he did in practice, purple sectors everywhere, take pole position, and then when it came to the race, absolutely send it, open up a lovely little gap and get your pit stops done, no real issues, and bring home the win. But I think it hurts because of how close he was, to be honest. I think that's what it was. He was so close to getting the race win. And by that, I mean he was a 10th away, because that race was won by Lando yesterday. It's a qualifier's race. But yeah, it was absolutely amazing to watch Leclerc today. He really did put the pressure on Norris in those closing stations. Norris even having to come over the radio and be like, where is Piastri? Like, I need him to come and put pressure on Leclerc, because Norris was beginning to get a little bit shaky out there with how much pressure Leclerc was putting on him. Leclerc just looked a bit more solid than Norris did in the closing stages. But do you know what? I will take a P2. I'll take a podium, because thank fuck we're back on the podium. I don't expect us to be there next week. I don't think, anyway. Nah, we're not going to be. I think that's us until the next real high downforce track. So yeah, it was nice while it lasted. And finally, McLaren with Lando Norris, who qualified first, started first, finished first, and Oscar Piastri, who qualified third, started third, finished third. I do think there was a little bit of a team game happening between McLaren in the opening stages of the race. You know, Piastri was about a second or two a lap slower than Norris, and it seemed that he was originally going to try and create a bit of a gap for Norris to pit into, but it never really came into fruition. I think McLaren then had to start responding to what was happening around them because there was so much chaos going on. McLaren not as solid in their pit stops. Again, quite a couple of quite slow stops that really put Piastri under pressure because he could have been vulnerable to Verstappen through these slow stops. But thankfully for Piastri, it wasn't really the case. I definitely think that because of how much pressure Norris was under from Leclerc, I do think that he sort of backed Leclerc up slightly because in a matter of laps, Piastri, who was 7 seconds down behind Leclerc, was suddenly 3 seconds behind Leclerc in like 2 laps. So I think Piastri definitely upped the pace, and I think Norris kind of pushed Leclerc back a little bit so that Piastri could put some pressure on Leclerc so that Norris wasn't so much under pressure. I don't think he really put too much pressure on Leclerc, to be honest, Piastri. I don't think he could get close enough to really do that, but a solid race from Piastri, to be honest. Norris, thank God we're back, because I was actually beginning to think that Norris wouldn't win another race this year. He obviously won in Australia, and then Piastri has won 4, Verstappen has won 2, and it really just seemed that that might be the case for the rest of the year. I think an incredible weekend from Norris to really begin to shut people up, including myself, to be honest. I've been sceptical and I've had my doubts about Lando Norris, especially these past few race weekends, and especially when it comes to his qualifying. But really, this was one of those performances where he just gets us all to shut up because it was incredible. You know, every session that mattered, he was quickest. You know, he was fastest in Q3 when it mattered to get in pole position, to get him a new track record. He's done the fastest lap around Monaco there has ever been. And then we come to the race, and not only is it a race win, but it's the fastest lap. So it's race win, fastest lap, new track record, pole position. Like, he's really just had, when it mattered, the perfect weekend. And yes, he was put under pressure. I think he coped brilliantly with the pressure he was put under today. Not only with it being Monaco, there being the unknown of the 2-stop, the pressure from Leclerc. What's Red Bull going to pull out? Are they going to do something crazy? Like, there was so much unknown and so much uncertainty. And I think that Norris went into every session that mattered with the right attitude, level-headed, and just went with it. And I do think that even when he wasn't the quickest, say through practice sessions and stuff, when he was asked about certain things, I do think he has maybe turned a bit of a corner in not letting on too much how he feels, displaying and showcasing his emotions as much as he did. And I'm never saying there's something wrong. I think he should be able to show his emotions. But as, you know, Martin Brundle and stuff say, that is a really easy way for your competitors to begin to take advantage almost, because they can see where your weaknesses are and your uncertainties are. So I think there's a bit of a different Lando on track this weekend, and I think he had a fantastic race. I did actually think that on turn 1, though, he was dead into the wall. When he locked up going into Saint-Devoux, I thought, oh my God, that's it. I thought he was straight into the wall. But no, he managed to continue, managed to retain his lead of the race, so a good recovery from Norris there. But yeah, I think Norris has had a bit of a smarter race this weekend. You know, for a few weekends now, I've said that he's not really been playing things smart, and you know, he's making silly mistakes, and I think he was much better this weekend. I think he handled what was happening on track a lot smarter and a lot better. Like, knowing he was struggling in the dirty air from Verstappen, knowing that Verstappen still had to pit again, knowing that he needed help from his teammate just to back Leclerc up a little bit. That's helping himself by giving himself a bit of clean air, but also allowing Piastri to get behind Leclerc a bit quicker. All of these types of things. I think it was a bit of a smarter race from Norris, and I do think it was a very well-deserved win. He was the fastest car out on track. And that is everything from a fairly chaotic Monaco Grand Prix. Now, in terms of the 2-stop strategy, now, do I think the mandatory 2-stop strategy worked? As an experiment, no. I think if the goal was to have better racing, it failed. I mean, you're not going to have better racing without making the cars smaller. The machines are just too big for this track. I do think that it succeeded in providing us with something different and a lot to talk about. There will be those that say this has just become a farce now, that Monaco, that as much as the history and everything of it is nice, that it's time for Monaco to go. You know, we're losing tracks because the racing isn't there. Why would we keep Monaco? And I would say, you know, money is definitely a big part of that. So yeah, there'll be people that will still call for Monaco to be off the calendar, and you know, this is just becoming a bit of a comedy show and a bit of a farce and a joke, and it's not doing anything. The racing's not there. Why are we even bothering at this point? On the flip side, there will be people that absolutely loved it because it was, you know, provided something different and interesting to what we usually see in Monaco and at other race weekends. I am somewhere in the middle. I do think that if we are to continue with this, if Monaco has to become a compulsory and mandatory two-stopper, there does need to be some work done to it, because more and more teams will just begin to exploit the loopholes and everything in it, and it will just become a bit more of a farce. I do think that the signs are there to see what will happen if this just continues year on year on year. As for the racing, it's done nothing for racing, but yes, I also really enjoyed it because it made it really interesting for me. There wasn't one moment where I was like, God, is this still going on? As much as I do think some of it was a bit farcical, I still was really interested in what was happening. And yes, I do believe the format could still do with some work and some tweaking, but I have no problem with the team gameplay. I have no problem with there being so many different strategies. Like, what I want more than anything is obviously close on track racing, but I want there to be so many different strategies going on. I want each of the teams to be trying something different, even trying something different within their own drivers. Like, so many times we go to the track and, you know, 10 teams are all on the same strategy. What I liked about this is there was so many different strategies going on, and that's because nobody really had an idea what anyone else was going to do and how it was going to play out. As I said, even Pirelli were like, we've got not a clue what is about to happen. So here's the tyres that are available. We don't know the strategy. We don't know the optimum. Anything can happen. They literally put that on the graphic. Anything can happen. But yeah, I enjoyed the bazillion different strategies. I enjoyed the team gameplay. I enjoyed the chaos. I think Monaco has never really been a race for quite some time now that is all about pure overtaking. But it is so much more than just overtaking. If you're watching just for that, then, you know, Formula One might not actually be the series for you, because overtaking is becoming less and less just now due to the size of the machinery and the tracks being quite small. But if that is your thing, then I understand Monaco not being for you. But Monaco is so much more than just overtaking. You know, it's the strategies, it's the team setups, it's the driver skill in terms of driving a track that, you know, the walls are so close, but also just the mentality of the drivers to keep it going for 78 laps. You know, Monaco, and there are similar races on the calendar, is a race of strategy. And I think what is different for Monaco is it just doesn't hide from that. And listen, I know there will be people that watch Formula One for on-track action and the overtaking and the drama of it all, but for these races, I think if you can just lean in slightly to understanding the strategic decisions and learning from the data and everything, you'll find the races a little bit more enjoyable, because I actually did quite enjoy that. And I mean, yes, it did nothing for racing and overtaking, but there's the Silverstones and the Brazils and everything that give us that. I can appreciate Monaco for what it is, you know. It's the strategy from the teams, it's the mental capacity of the drivers, it's the team gameplay, it's all of that kind of stuff. And it is just a little bit of chaos with a Mediterranean glam on it. And I do quite like Monaco, and I definitely think it has its place on the calendar, because even out with the racing, Monaco provides so much info to the teams because it's such a specific track. So no, I actually really enjoyed it, but I do think that if we're going to continue with it, the format definitely needs some tweaks. But that is everything from us. Let us know what you think of the new Monaco two-stop strategy in the comments down below. Did you enjoy it? Did you not? I want to hear everything. And we will see you back very soon for our predictions for Spain. The final race of this triple header coming up next week. But we will see you very soon. I love you. Bye.